Magnolia Thornwell's voice cracked as she asked the question that would either save or destroy her 3-week marriage. "Can you make me come?" The virgin cowboy went pale, his slight frame frozen in the lantern light. At 26, he'd inherited a Wyoming cattle ranch, but never a woman's touch. He'd sent for a mail-order bride out of desperate loneliness, but when Magnolia arrived, powerful as a workhorse, beautiful as a sunrise, and twice the size of any woman in Redemption Creek, terror had kept him from their marriage bed for 21 agonizing nights. "I don't know how," Jasper admitted, the words choking out of him like a confession at gunpoint. But the giant mail-order bride saw something in his face that stopped her from leaving, something raw and desperate and real. "I don't know how," the virgin cowboy repeated, his voice breaking. "But God help me, Maggie. I love you so desperately I'll learn every spot on your body until I find what makes you tremble." Magnolia's tears fell like rain on parched earth. No man had ever wanted to learn her. They'd only ever wanted her gone. But could a virgin cowboy who admitted he didn't know how truly satisfy a giant mail-order bride who'd been made to feel like a freak her entire life? Could desperate love bridge the gap between ignorance and intimacy? And what spots would he discover in his desperate quest to make his giant bride tremble? The answer would change both their lives forever. 3 weeks earlier, Magnolia had stepped off the westbound train in Redemption Creek wearing her only good dress, brown calico let out at every seam, and carrying everything she owned in a single worn carpet bag. The platform had gone silent. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men stared with their mouths hanging open like barn doors in a windstorm. She was used to it. At 28 years old, she'd been stared at her entire life. But then she'd seen him. Jasper Coltrane stood at the end of the platform, hat in his trembling hands, barely reaching her shoulder even in his boots. His advertisement had been honest. Small ranch, hard work, simple life. But he'd never mentioned he was a foot shorter than her and built like a willow switch. Their eyes met. His went wide, hers filled with the familiar sting of disappointment. "Miss Thornwell." His voice had been soft, uncertain. "That's me." She'd forced her chin up, waiting for him to make an excuse, to say there'd been a mistake, to send her back east on the next train. Instead, he'd smiled, a shy, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Welcome to Wyoming. I'm real glad you came." Those words had given her hope. Foolish hope, as it turned out. The wedding had been quick, performed by the circuit preacher in front of half the town. She'd felt their judgment like heat from a forge. Jasper had kissed her cheek, just her cheek, and the whispers had started immediately. That night, he'd shown her to the bedroom and announced he'd sleep in the barn loft. To give her space, he'd said, to let her get comfortable. But 3 weeks had passed and he still hadn't touched her beyond helping her down from the wagon or handing her tools during chores. He was kind. He was respectful. He thanked her for every meal and complimented her cooking and asked about her day. But he never touched her like a husband should touch a wife. And Magnolia knew why. She'd seen it before, back in Missouri. The way men looked at her, like she was interesting but not desirable, impressive but not feminine, useful but not beautiful. She was too much, too tall, too strong, too big in every way that mattered. So tonight, she'd packed her bag. She'd leave at dawn with what remained of her dignity before the pity in Jasper's eyes turned to relief. But then he'd found her in the barn, and she'd asked the question that had been burning in her chest for 21 lonely nights. The blunt, desperate question that nice women weren't supposed to ask. "Can you make me come?" Now, in the heavy silence that followed his confession, Magnolia studied her virgin cowboy husband. His face was scarlet, but his eyes, those soft brown eyes that had welcomed her off the train, held nothing but anguish and honesty. "You really don't know?" she whispered. "No," the word came out broken. "There was never time. Mama and Papa died when I was 19, left me this ranch and a mountain of debt. I worked sunrise to midnight just to keep it. Never courted, never went to dances, never learned what a man's supposed to know." His hands twisted his hat like he was wringing out wet laundry. "When I finally got the ranch profitable, I was 25 and didn't know how to talk to women anymore. So I put in for a mail-order bride, figuring maybe a woman who answered would be patient with a fool like me." He looked up at her, and the raw vulnerability in his face made her chest ache. "Then you stepped off that train, and you were so beautiful I forgot how to breathe. Every day since, I wake up terrified I'll touch you wrong. Terrified, I'll hurt you or disappoint you or make you sorry you came. Terrified, you'll realize you married a man who doesn't know the first damn thing about pleasing a woman. Magnolia felt something crack open inside her chest. You think I'm beautiful? God, yes. The words burst out of him like he'd been holding them back for weeks. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The way you move, strong and sure. The way sunlight catches in your hair when you hang the washing. How you hum when you cook and don't know I'm listening. Every single thing about you makes me ache. Then why? Her voice broke. Why won't you touch me? Because I don't want to ruin it. He took a step toward her, craning his neck to hold her gaze. You're perfect, Maggie. And I'm just some ignorant ranch hand who'd probably fumble the whole thing and make you wish you'd never come west. She stared at him, this small, honest, terrified man, and something shifted in her heart. What if we fumble it together? Jasper blinked. What? What if we're both scared? She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his cheek. Her palm nearly covered the whole side of his face. What if we figure it out, together? His hand came up to cover hers, and his touch was gentle, reverent. I'd want that, more than anything. But Maggie, I don't even know where to start. She pulled her hand back and began unlacing the front of her dress, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely work the strings. Then I'll show you where I end, and you find everything in between. The house was dark and quiet when they crossed from the barn, their hands linked, his swallowed entirely by hers. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Magnolia's heart hammered so hard against her ribs she thought it might crack right through the bone. Inside the bedroom, Jasper lit the oil lamp with trembling fingers. The flame caught, casting warm golden light across the simple room, handmade quilt, pine dresser, the marriage bed they'd never shared. Maggie stood in the center of the room feeling enormous. The ceiling barely cleared her head. The doorframe had left a bruise on her forehead, her second day here when she'd forgotten to duck. Everything in this house was built for normal-sized people, and she was anything but normal. What are you thinking? Jasper's voice was soft behind her. That I don't know how to be small. She gestured at herself, the broad shoulders, the muscled arms from years of farm work, the height that made men back home joke she should have been born a man. That I might hurt you, that I'm built like a plow horse and you're— Stop! He moved in front of her, and even standing on the woven rag rug while she stood on bare floorboards, he had to look up to meet her eyes. You want to know what I see when I look at you? She shook her head, afraid to hear the truth. I see strength, real strength, not the kind men brag about in saloons. I see a woman who crossed half a continent alone because she was brave enough to want more than what people said she deserved. His voice grew rough with emotion. I see someone beautiful enough to make my hands shake. That's what I see, Maggie. That's all I've ever seen. Her vision blurred with tears. Nobody's ever called me beautiful before, not meaning it. Then they were all blind fools. He reached for the buttons of his shirt, and his fingers fumbled so badly he couldn't work them loose. Lord, I'm nervous. Despite everything, Maggie laughed, a wet, broken sound. Me too. Here. She stepped closer and helped him with the buttons, her larger fingers steadier than his. When his shirt fell open, she saw lean muscle and old scars, a life written on skin, a rope burn across his ribs, a jagged line on his shoulder where a horse had kicked him. The story of a man who'd survived, alone. He shrugged the shirt off, standing bare-chested in the lamplight, vulnerable and waiting. Your turn, he whispered. Maggie's hands went to the laces of her dress, the brown calico she'd let out 3 times and still strained across her frame. She'd sewn this dress herself because nothing in any catalog fit a woman her size. As she loosened the laces, she watched Jasper's face for the moment when attraction would turn to disgust. It never came. The dress pooled at her feet. She stood in her cotton chemise and Jasper's breath caught like he'd been punched. Lord have mercy, he breathed. Maggie. She flinched, waiting for the rest, the disappointment, the polite excuse. You're glorious. He stepped closer, his eyes tracking over her like she was something rare and precious. Like something carved from marble, like one of them Greek statues in the books the school teacher showed me once, like strength and beauty all wrapped up in one woman. His hand lifted, hesitant, hovering near her waist. Can I touch you? She nodded, not trusting her voice. His palm settled against her waist, warm and calloused and gentle. She jerked at the contact. Did I hurt you? Panic flooded his face. No. The word came out choked. Nobody's touched me gentle since I was a little girl. My mama died when I was 12, and after that it was just hard work and roughness and people treating me like a piece of furniture to move around. Something broke in Jasper's expression, something that looked like grief and fury mixed together. Then I'll touch you gentle every day for the rest of our lives, I swear it. He guided her to the bed, and when she sat on the edge, they were finally eye to eye. The mattress dipped under her weight. She'd been terrified of breaking this bed, of being too heavy, too much. But Jasper moved between her knees like he belonged there, his hands framing her face. "Teach me," he said simply. "Show me what you like." "I'm listening, Maggie. I'm here to learn." She took his hand, so small in hers, and placed it against the side of her neck. "Here, slow, like you're memorizing it." His fingers traced the column of her throat, learning the shape of her. She shuddered, and he felt it. "That?" he asked, wonder in his voice. "Yes. More." He explored with the focus of a man learning to read, touching her collarbone, the hollow of her throat, the rapid pulse beneath her jaw. Each touch drew a reaction, a sigh, a gasp, a tremor she couldn't control. "You're so responsive," he marveled. "Every little touch makes you shake." "Because nobody ever cared enough to notice." The confession spilled out before she could stop it. They just saw the giant girl. They never saw the woman underneath who wanted to be touched, who wanted to be wanted. Jasper's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving them all wrong." His hands moved to her shoulders, sliding the straps of her chemise down with reverent slowness. The fabric whispered against her skin as it fell, bearing her to him completely. She waited for shame, for the urge to cover herself. Instead, she felt powerful, desired, seen. Jasper's hands shook as he touched her breasts, tentative, worshipful, learning their weight and shape. When his thumb brushed across her nipple, she gasped and arched into his touch. "There?" His voice was hushed, awed. "Yes, God, Jasper, yes!" He filed it away like treasure, continuing his exploration. Behind her ear made her whimper. The inside of her wrist made her breath catch. The curve where her neck met her shoulder made her moan his name. "Show me more," he whispered against her skin. "Show me everything. I want to know every spot that makes you tremble, every place that makes you feel like the beautiful woman you are." So she guided his hands lower, across her ribs, her belly, her thighs. She taught him the geography of her body, the sensitive spots, the places that made her gasp, the touches that drove her wild. When his fingers found the spot on her inner thigh that made her whole body jerk, he smiled, a genuine, delighted smile. "That's a good spot." "Yes." She was laughing and crying at once, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. "That's a very good spot." He kissed her there, soft and reverent, and she trembled so hard the bed frame creaked. "I got you," he murmured against her skin. "I got you, Maggie. You're safe with me." His hands moved higher, following her whispered instructions until his fingers were between her thighs, exploring territory no man had ever touched with tenderness. She showed him the rhythm, the pressure, the exact spot that made stars burst behind her eyelids. "Oh, like this?" he asked, his voice rough with concentration and desire. "Yes, just like, oh God, just like that." The pleasure built like a summer storm, slow at first, then faster, rising higher and higher until she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel. His fingers moved with growing confidence, reading her body's responses, adjusting his touch based on every gasp and moan. When she finally shattered, it wasn't like the lonely releases she'd given herself in desperate privacy. This was connection. This was being known and wanted and cherished. This was what it meant to be made love to, even if they hadn't gotten to that part yet. She cried out his name as waves of pleasure rolled through her body, her hands tangling in his hair, her powerful thighs trembling around his hand. When the tremors finally subsided, she pulled him up to her and kissed him fiercely, tasting her own tears on his lips. "Did I do it right?" he asked against her mouth, vulnerable as a boy. "You did it perfect." She pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around his narrow frame. "But we're not done, not nearly done." His eyes widened. "There's more?" "So much more." She reached for the buttons of his trousers with shaking fingers. "Now it's my turn. To learn you." Jasper sucked in a sharp breath as Maggie's hands worked the buttons of his trousers. Her fingers, so large and capable, fumbled with the same nervous energy that had made his hands shake minutes before. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered, and the fear in her voice cut straight through him. "You won't." He covered her hands with his, stilling them. "Maggie, look at me." She lifted her eyes, dark and wet with tears that hadn't fallen yet. I trust you, he said simply, more than I've ever trusted anyone. She finished unbuttoning his trousers, pushing them down along with his union suit until he stood as bare as she was. The lamplight painted them both in gold and shadow, this mismatched pair who fit together in ways that had nothing to do with size. Maggie's eyes traveled over him, and he resisted the urge to cover himself. He was built lean and wiry, all sinew and scars, nothing like the broad-shouldered cowboys who worked the cattle drives through town. But the way she looked at him, like he was something precious, made him feel bigger than his frame. "Can I touch you?" Her voice trembled. "Please." Her hands explored him the way his had explored her, tentative at first, then bolder. She traced the muscles of his chest, the ridges of his ribs, the old scars that marked him. When her fingers wrapped around him, he gasped and his knees nearly buckled. "Like this?" she asked, her voice hushed with wonder. "Yes. God, yes." She learned him with the same focus he'd shown her, listening to every hitch in his breath, every groan, every whispered instruction. Her hands were large enough to overwhelm him, but her touch was impossibly gentle, reverent even. "I want you inside me," she whispered against his ear, and the words sent fire racing through his blood. "I want to feel you. I want this to be real." He nodded, unable to form words, and let her guide him back to the bed. She lay down first, and even horizontal she dominated the space, powerful and beautiful, and trusting him with something no one else had ever touched with kindness. Jasper climbed over her, his smaller frame cradled between her thighs, and the rightness of it hit him like a lightning strike. This was where he belonged. This woman, this strong, magnificent woman, was his home. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted again, positioned at her entrance, shaking so hard he could barely hold himself steady. "Neither do I." She cupped his face in her palms. "So we'll figure it out together. Just go slow. Listen to me. I'll tell you what I need." He pushed forward slowly, and the heat of her body enveloped him inch by trembling inch. She gasped, not in pain, but in something that sounded like relief, like coming home after a long exile. "Okay?" he managed, frozen in place, terrified of moving wrong. "More than okay." Her hands gripped his shoulders. "Keep going. Don't stop." He sank deeper until he was fully seated inside her, and the sensation was so overwhelming he had to close his eyes and breathe through it. She surrounded him completely, her body, her scent, her presence. He'd never felt less alone in his entire life. "Now what?" he whispered. "Now you move." Her legs wrapped around his waist, and the strength in them, the raw power, sent a thrill through him. Slow at first. Find a rhythm. Listen to what my body tells you." He started moving, clumsy at first, unsure of the angle or the pace, but Maggie's hands guided his hips, her voice coached him through it, and gradually he found something that made her gasp and arch beneath him. "There," she breathed, "right there, like that." He focused on that angle, that rhythm, adjusting based on every sound she made. Her body tightened around him, and he felt her getting close to that edge again, the same trembling peak he'd brought her to with his hands. "Touch me," she gasped, "like before, while you're inside me." His hand slipped between their bodies, finding that spot she'd shown him, and the combination made her cry out so loud he worried the horses would hear in the barn. "Jasper, oh God!" She shattered around him, her body clenching and pulsing, her powerful legs holding him so tight he couldn't have pulled away if he'd wanted to, and he didn't want to. He wanted to stay buried in her forever, wanted to feel her pleasure rolling through her, wanted to be the man who made this magnificent woman tremble. The sensation of her climax triggered his own. He'd never felt anything like it. The release, yes, but more than that, the connection, the belonging, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. "Maggie, I love you." The words tore out of him as he spilled inside her, his whole body shaking with the force of it. "I love you. I love you. I love you." "Show me," she gasped, pulling him deeper with her legs. "Keep showing me." When it was over, he collapsed on top of her, his slight weight barely registering on her powerful frame. Their hearts hammered against each other, his bird fast, hers deep and strong like a drum. "Was that—" He couldn't even finish the question. "That was everything." She stroked his sweat-damp hair, her touch impossibly tender. "That was exactly right." They lay tangled together in the lamplight, neither willing to break the connection yet. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the prairie, rattling the windows and making the lamp flame dance. But inside their marriage bed, everything was warm and safe and right. "I almost left," Maggie confessed to the darkness above them. "I had my bag packed. I was going to take the Dawn stage back to Missouri and pretend this whole thing never happened. Jasper's arms tightened around her waist, as far as they could reach, which wasn't far. What changed your mind? You did. She kissed the top of his head. You were honest. You didn't pretend to be something you weren't. You didn't lie to spare my feelings, or your pride. You just told me the truth, even though it was hard. I was terrified you'd laugh at me. His voice was muffled against her breast. Or worse, pity me. I could never pity a man brave enough to admit what he doesn't know. She tilted his face up to look at her. Most men would have fumbled through it and blamed me when it went wrong, made me feel like it was my fault for being too big, too much, too difficult to please. But you asked me to teach you. You made it about learning me, not proving yourself. Jasper felt tears burn behind his eyes. You make it sound noble. I was just scared and desperate. Sometimes that's the same thing as brave, she kissed him softly. And for what it's worth, you're a very quick learner. He laughed against her lips, the sound surprised out of him. I got motivated. I noticed. She pulled the quilt over them both, cocooning them in warmth. What happens now? Now? He traced lazy patterns on her skin, already cataloging new spots to explore. Now I spend the next 50 years learning new ways to make you tremble. That sound acceptable? Acceptable. She smiled in the darkness. More than acceptable. They drifted in comfortable silence, their bodies cooling, their breathing synchronizing. Jasper felt himself starting to doze, safe and sated in a way he'd never experienced. But then Maggie spoke again, her voice small. The town's going to keep talking, keep judging us. It's not going to stop just because we figured out how to let them talk. Jasper pushed himself up on one elbow to look at her properly. Let them whisper and stare and make all the jokes they want. I don't care, Maggie. You're my wife. You're the woman I love, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. You say that now, but I'll say it to their faces. His voice hardened with determination. In fact, I think we should go to church on Sunday, together. Let everyone see exactly what kind of marriage we have. Maggie's eyes went wide. Jasper, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He cupped her face in his hands. You came all this way, left everything you knew, married a stranger who was too scared to touch you for 3 weeks. The least I can do is stand up in front of this whole town and claim you properly. Let them all know that Magnolia Coltrane is my wife, and I'm proud of that fact. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. No one's ever stood up for me before, not once in 28 years. Then it's about damn time someone did. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, starting with your husband. She pulled him back down to her, and they made love again, slower this time, with more confidence and less fear. Jasper discovered 3 new spots that made her gasp, behind her knee, the curve of her hip, and the small of her back where her spine dipped. He filed them all away like treasure. Sunday morning came cold and bright, the kind of Wyoming day where the sky stretched forever and the wind cut through wool like it was tissue paper. Magnolia stood in front of the cracked mirror in their bedroom, trying to work her hair into something respectable. Her hands shook. You don't have to do this, she said for the 3rd time, watching Jasper button his Sunday shirt in the reflection. We could skip church this week, give folks time to get used to the idea of us. They've had 3 weeks. Jasper turned to face her, his jaw set in a way she was learning meant he'd made up his mind. That's plenty of time. Today we go together, as husband and wife. She twisted to look at him directly, this small, determined man who'd learned her body in the darkness and now wanted to claim her in the light. They're going to stare. They're going to whisper things that'll cut you. Let them. He crossed to her and took her hand, his swallowed entirely by hers like always. Maggie, I spent 3 weeks being a coward, letting you sleep alone, letting you think you weren't wanted, letting you hurt because I was too scared of my own inadequacy. I'm done being that man. You were never a coward. She squeezed his hand gently, still terrified of her own strength. You were just... I was. He cut her off firmly. But I'm not anymore. You changed that. Last night changed that. And today the whole town of Redemption Creek is going to know that I love my wife, and I don't give a damn what they think about it. 30 minutes later, they rode into town in the wagon, her sitting tall beside him, their thighs touching on the narrow bench seat. Every person they passed stopped to stare. Mrs. Henderson actually dropped her market basket. Tom Weatherby at the general store stepped out onto his porch, mouth hanging open. The whitewashed church sat at the end of Main Street, its bell already ringing for service. Wagons and horses crowded the yard. The whole town would be there. Jasper helped Maggie down from the wagon, and even that simple act drew attention. She had to bend almost double for him to reach her waist. Some teenage boys near the hitching post snickered behind their hands. "Steady," Jasper murmured, though she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. They walked toward the church entrance, and Maggie felt every eye on them. Her dark blue calico dress, the one she'd sewn herself because nothing else fit, suddenly felt too tight, too plain, too much like exactly what it was, the desperate attempt of an oversized woman to look respectable. The church doors stood open. Inside, she could hear Reverend Matthews starting the opening hymn. Most of the congregation was already seated. They stepped through the doors together, and the singing stuttered and died like someone had blown out a candle. 63 faces turned to stare. Maggie's steps faltered. The aisle stretched before them like a gauntlet. She could hear the whispers, already starting, the hissed words that cut deeper than any blade. "That's the giant mail-order bride. Look at poor Jasper. Probably gets crushed every night. Unnatural is what it is. Woman that size ain't meant for her name." Jasper's voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the whispers like an axe through kindling, "is Magnolia Coltrane. She's my wife, and I'll thank you all to show her the respect she deserves." The church went silent as a grave. Maggie's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Jasper's hand found hers, holding tight. "Jasper, you don't have to," she whispered. "Yes, I do." He turned to face the congregation fully, pulling her forward to stand beside him. "Y'all have been talking about us for 3 weeks now, about how she's too big and I'm too small and it ain't natural. Well, I got news for every single one of you." He stepped closer to Maggie, and she instinctively bent down so he could reach her. Right there, in front of God and the whole town of Redemption Creek, Jasper Coltrane pulled his giant mail-order bride down and kissed her. Not a polite peck, not a brotherly kiss on the cheek. A real kiss, deep and claiming and absolutely clear about what kind of marriage they had. When they broke apart, Maggie's face was wet with tears and her whole body trembled, but not from shame, from something else entirely. "I love my wife," Jasper announced to the shocked crowd, his voice steady and sure. "Every magnificent inch of her. She's the strongest woman I've ever known, the kindest, the most beautiful, and I thank the Lord Almighty every single day that she chose me, that she came all the way from Missouri to be my partner, that she's willing to build a life with a man who doesn't deserve her but is going to spend the rest of his days trying to." He paused, his eyes sweeping the congregation with a challenge in them. "So, if any of you have a problem with that, if any of you want to make jokes or spread gossip or treat my wife with anything less than the respect she's owed, you can take it up with me directly, after service, outside, and I'll be happy to discuss it." The silence stretched so long Maggie could hear the wind outside rattling the window panes. Then, from the back pew, old Widow Abernathy stood up. She was 80 if she was a day, bent with age but fierce as a rattlesnake. Her black dress rustled as she moved. "About damn time," the widow said, her voice carrying clear through the church. "Someone in this town married for love instead of convenience." She looked directly at Maggie, and her wrinkled face softened. "Welcome to Redemption Creek, Mrs. Coltrane. You pay these busybodies no mind. Half of them married for land or money or because their parents told them to. But you two," she gestured between them with her cane, "you two got something real. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of it." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sarah Hutchins, the blacksmith's wife, stood up. "Widow Abernathy's right. Welcome, Mrs. Coltrane." The schoolteacher, Miss Patricia Wells, rose next. "We're glad you're here." One by one, other voices joined in. Not everyone. Some folks still looked scandalized, and the teenage boys near the back still snickered. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to make Maggie's tears fall faster. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat from the pulpit. "Well then, shall we continue with the service? Mr. and Mrs. Coltrane, there's room in the third pew if you'd like to sit down." They made their way down the aisle together, heads high, hands clasped. When they sat, Maggie having to fold her long legs carefully to fit in the narrow pew, Jasper kept his arm around her waist, right where everyone could see. The service passed in a blur. Maggie heard none of the sermon, registered none of the hymns. She was too busy feeling the solid warmth of her husband beside her, the way he held her like she was something precious, the way he'd stood up in front of everyone and claimed her publicly. After the final blessing, they walked out together into the bright Wyoming sunshine. Some people smiled, some looked away. A few men actually tipped their hats to Maggie, and she nearly cried again from the simple respect of it. Tom Weatherby from the general store approached them carefully. "Mrs. Coltrane, I wanted to apologize for my rudeness when you first arrived. It was unkind, and you didn't deserve it. I hope you'll still shop at my store." "Of course, Mr. Weatherby." Maggie's voice came out stronger than she expected. "Thank you for saying so." The ride home was quiet, but it was a good quiet. Comfortable. Jasper's hand rested on her knee, and she covered it with her own. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, as their ranch came into view across the golden prairie. "Stand up like that. Kiss me in front of everyone." "Yes, I did." He turned to look at her, squinting against the sun. "You're my wife, Maggie. My partner. My love. The whole world needs to know that." That night, in their marriage bed, Jasper discovered 4 new spots that made his giant mail-order bride tremble. The curve where her neck met her shoulder, the inside of her elbow, the soft skin behind her knee, and the small of her back, where his hands fit perfectly in the dip of her spine. "You're getting mighty proficient at this," she teased, breathless and glowing in the lamplight, her powerful body loose and satisfied. "Got a good teacher." He kissed her collarbone, then her throat, then her lips. "And a lifetime left to learn." She pulled him closer, wrapping her strong arms around his narrow frame, and they moved together with the easy rhythm of people who'd found where they belonged. Outside, the Wyoming night pressed dark and cold against the windows, but inside, love burned warm enough to last forever. Later, as they lay tangled in the quilts, Jasper traced lazy patterns on her skin, cataloging, memorizing, loving. You happy?" he asked softly. Maggie looked at this small, fierce man who'd admitted he didn't know how but loved her desperately enough to learn, who'd stood up in front of their entire town and claimed her, who made her tremble with pleasure and feel beautiful and wanted for the first time in her 28 years. "I'm more than happy," she whispered. "I'm home." "Good." He kissed her shoulder, her neck, the spot behind her ear that made her shiver. "Because I ain't never letting you go. That's a promise I'm keeping until my last breath." She held him close as sleep crept in, this virgin cowboy who'd become her lover, her defender, her partner in all things. The man who'd answered her desperate question with brutal honesty and then spent every moment since proving that desperate love could bridge any gap, even the gap between ignorance and intimacy, between shame and acceptance, between 2 people who seemed all wrong for each other but fit together perfectly. The mail-order bride and the virgin cowboy, the giant woman and the small man. 2 misfits who'd found each other across the miles and the judgment and the fear, and built something real, something worth trembling for. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. We love hearing from viewers around the world. And if this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you never miss another emotional journey. We've got more powerful stories coming that will make you laugh, cry, and believe in love all over again. Hit that subscribe button now, and we'll see you in the next story.